Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's Thursday. Brian here, and of course, I'm joined with my co-host Daniel Payton, author Daniel Payton. Right?
Yep.
Hello.
I better be an author. I've been writing my brains out these past few weeks, and I'm still working hard.
Oh,
But yep, I'm here. It's been a crazy beginning of May, end of April. Just wanting things to calm down, but they're only going to get more uncalm because I have Comic Cons coming up and book signings and stuff that I'm dealing with. And I just got a big order of my comic books in, 64 of them for me to sign and send back to the Kickstarter people to give out for rewards. Because
right,
people who
right.
paid for certain tiers on our Kickstarter for the comic book, they got signed
Wow.
copies. So,
Oh, good. I
so
hope
right now,
that I hope that some of those belong to some of our viewers.
I hope so.
I know that some did donate, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
um, yeah. Oh, that's nice. That's neat.
I'm gonna get pictures and or video of myself signing them because they want us to have like this big reveal of us signing them, personally signing each and every one of them, and then I'll have those. I'll share some of those pictures, but those are going to go out for our Kickstarter stuff. But this is the last leg of the actual Kickstarter because you got the announcement, money raising, and then doing whatever you need to do with the money, and then rewards. Once you get the rewards done, the Kickstarter is finally done. Kickstarter is a great way to get something funded, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Yeah. Then you gotta
And
sign 64 of those things.
yep, and the big and other big news this past week, my comic book is now available in both digital and print through Amazon. So if you want to buy your own copy of it, if you didn't get one from the Kickstarter, then you can get off of Amazon. Now, if you reading it, you can read this and enjoy it by itself. Its story is kind of self-contained. You might not understand a few of the elements like the relationships between a few of the people. However, the story makes sense.
Yeah.
However, this is classified by my publisher as book 4 of the Bark universe. Story 4. I mean, not really a book, but story 4 of the Bark
Mm,
universe. So,
mm.
um, when I continue writing more of the Bark stories, you will need to have read this to get the understanding of who's who and what's going on. Because there is a villain introduced in this comic that will have a big impact on the story going forward for my part of the Cosby Media universe. Because we're going to try and combine all of our superhero universes together at some point, overlapping each other, and so that's mine's going to be included in there at some point. So it looks
Okay.
like John Clark is on. Barbara, Valerie, hello, hello, and hello.
Here, let's see here. Yeah, my aunt is here. My grandmother.
And
Hello.
Amber just popped in.
Yeah, my other aunt. John is here. John, hello, John Clark.
Hello, hello.
Did you
So
ever? You told me John Clark is a writer, right?
yes,
Okay.
he's got stuff published as well.
Okay. Is this stuff on Amazon? I'm
I,
looking for things to read.
well, yeah,
So,
John. Again, you can share your links, John, on here to people who are on here. And one of these days, we need to have you on. You can talk about what you're doing.
oh, wouldn't that be something? John on the other end of
Mm-hmm.
the show.
Mm-hmm. So,
Oh, come on, John. I think that would be pretty cool. So, yeah.
well, I want to say first of all, everybody, we have Twitch, we have YouTube, we have Facebook, all watching us simultaneously live. So if you're on any of the platforms, like, follow, share, subscribe, all of the above. And again, share. That's the most important part of this is that people know about it. So get out there, ask your questions too. We have an author on today, has a new book out, so she can talk about writing and talk about her writing. But if you have questions about that, post it. Uh, I
Cool.
do, I do have my weekly soapbox of something that just gets on my last nerve about
What is it?
writing.
What is it this time?
Well, I had someone who share a growing. I'm not going to say her name because I don't want to be like calling somebody out, but it's a growingly well known YouTuber who is an author who posts stuff about writing itself, not her books as much, but about writing itself. But it's do's and don'ts and what tropes you shouldn't be doing, cliche. She does a lot of basically don'ts. Now I find her a little highly opinionated and a little bit arrogant, but that comes across often when you're dealing with people, especially when you're stating something. One of my problems I have in writing is a hard nose yes or a hard nose no. And what I mean is there are things you should and shouldn't do. Okay, don't publish a book that hasn't been properly edited. You don't want something messy going out there. You want it looking good. So that's a pretty good. Everybody should know that's a no. Don't publish it without self-publish or major publish without proper editing. But she goes through a list recently of all these things that authors are told that are just not true, and she makes that profound, just not true. And I'm listening to her list, and I'm like, but I have listened to well-known authors, editors, agents, and publishers who say, do this. And then I've listened to the same classification of people from that and from the indie side of it that say, don't do this. And both of them say hard, this is absolutely, you never do it, or you absolutely must do it. And I get tired of that because they're contradictory. And when you're dealing with new authors, indie authors, young authors, anybody who's getting into the field, and you have a professional they respect who's published, or a publisher who's saying do, and then you meet someone else who's in the same classification going don't. You know how confusing that is? And it also, and when you really boil it down, both of them are wrong because every situation is different. Sometimes this works. Sometimes I'll pull this out. She said in fantasy that no one ever should write the old white. She made sure and classified race, which is like this fantasy. White old man who is the wizened advisor, Gandalf or Dumbledore. That don't write those anymore. Nobody likes those anymore. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I know people who do like those characters. So what makes you right to tell new authors don't write that?
How dare you?
That's unfair to an author who has a beloved story in their heart they're putting down on page, and all of a sudden here comes someone who's more professional than them saying, "Oh, don't ever write that type of character because no one wants to read that." That's not fair. That's flat not fair. And I don't think, and I get tired of listening to the contradictory hard yes and hard no from all these people when it really is just their opinion. Now, listen, I'll say this to anybody who is an author, wants to be an author, and even that, listen to advice, take it under, your own wings and figure out if it's going to work for you and, move on. But not every piece of advice coming out of the mouth of a super professional is 100% correct or 100% a rule. There are no writing police going to pound down your door and go, "Oh, you use that trope. That's no longer allowed." No one's doing that. So don't let these people hurt your writing by giving you their opinion as a rule. It's not. I say there's very few that I will say to any author that you're going to get from everybody that are the exact same. Like I said, edit your work. I mean, flat out, just edit your work. That's a big one. There's things like that. No one's going to tell you not to do that in the professional field. So, but that's why I wanted to say that because we have authors now who listen to this, and I'm seeing that more and more recently. All these YouTubers are getting out there, particularly YouTubers who are standing there and making all videos that are just absolutely because I'm so good. And literally, the attitude is because I'm published and I have books out. I know, and then they spew stuff that's not a rule. No one's written that down as a rule and passed it as legislation. It's just an opinion. So again, soapbox.
What's the show without one, right?
Yeah, no. There's several different areas. I want to talk to new authors, particularly when I'm coming up on another Comic-Con, and I deal with a lot of new authors that have never published, but when it comes to me and ask for advice. And so I really do try to come up with some, but I always tell them, this is my opinion. This worked for me. So take it, but use it as it works for you. and it's going to be totally different. It's going to be absolutely different for me than it is you're writing a book. It's going to be different than you. It's going to, John has books. It's going to be different for him. So there are things that, listen, and I'll leave it off with this last quote. This comes from Brandon Sanderson, well-known fantasy author. He said that basically advice comes in thirds. 1/3 of advice is absolutely good. It's like my you must edit your book. That's good advice, and everybody's going to agree. 1/3 of advice is opinion. I don't like this genre, so I'm going to say don't do this, or like her statement about old wise white people. That's opinion. Listen to it, but don't be so glued to it. And then 1/3 of it's garbage. It is so much their opinion. It only matters to them and not to you. So you have to learn how to sift the advice coming your way and which of those thirds it belongs.
Right.
And it takes time. It takes experience, writing and reading and getting out there to know which of those thirds you need to sift that advice into, and realize you're going to come across a lot of the crap side of it a whole lot from people. Even Stephen King has said stuff. People worship every word he says as though he's the writing God. Even Stephen King says stuff that I've sat back and went, no, that's for you, but not for me. And it didn't hurt my writing not to just religiously follow his advice on that one subject. But he says a lot of stuff that's absolutely true and very good to listen to. So a lot. He is very good when he talks about writing. Most of it is absolutely on the spot. You need to listen to him. Anyways, anything from you, Brian?
Me?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot. The same stuff, Not some, Today is Cinco de Mayo. Whoop, whoop. Cinco, right?
Yes. Everybody remember, drink and drive safely.
Am I right? Let's see if this works. Oh, look at that. Cinco de Mayo, everyone. I did not realize that because apparently they never canceled my subscription. So I've been paying this whole time. Yay. But anyways, so they send out these things that you could use. I didn't know that. I'm like, well, let's try it. So yeah, there you go. Happy Cinco de Mayo. I've been busy plugging away at my own writing. I just released chapter 6. So I'm learning. I'm going along.
I'm trying to think here. I've been working with Brian on setting up my own reading podcast. And is my first chapter live?
Your first chapter is live, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have been buried under all kinds of work this past week, so I haven't even had a chance to record. I was going to record several chapters between last time we talked and now, to have them prepped and ready to go. That hasn't had a chance to happen. So
yeah, so the link that I sent you to look at your profile there in the messenger, you can share that. I mean, anybody can view that. They can listen to it there. So it's also slowly making its way to all the other platforms that mine is also on. So eventually you will be on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Spotify. There's Deezer. There's something else. There's like a million things. So yeah, that's where I am. That's where people listen to me. So.
Okay, well, I wanted to announce it a little more now. I'm going to share the link. I just went and grabbed it. Here's the link to it. I'm doing I would call it book podcast, like Brian has done. Oh, looks like we're all sharing it. A book podcast where I'm doing a chapter by chapter read of a story. And I decided to start with, and it's going to take a while to finish, my Joshua of Egypt story that I started reading on my own Facebook Live I did for the longest time there. And I had people enjoying the story. And I had a hard time keeping up with it because, I was trying to do a show with a reading. Well, my show was no interviews, no thing special, just me and my story. So this makes it a lot easier because it's just a story. So you can listen to the first chapter there, and I will continue reading these chapters and getting them published on there. So, and it's free for people to get on there and do it, right? It's free.
Yeah, free. Free.
So
Free, people. Free. Listen to us for free. Yeah,
absolutely. You can go on there and listen to it for free. And this story of Joshua of Egypt is one of my favorite stories I've written that I have yet to publish. And it's I think it's gonna begin its life and may live its life as a podcast because that's where it's going right now. But I think it's great. I think people will enjoy it. So and for people who are on here, a lot of you were on listening to my show, so you've already heard. But don't forget to share it, like everything else. So, anyways, looks like so today we have a guest, an author, has a new book out, and she's celebrating this week with its release. Came out the 3rd. So it's just been a couple days, and his name is Joanna White. I'm going to bring her on so she can join us.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello again.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow.
Was she on the Brian and Sherry show?
No.
Yeah, I remember Brian. I don't remember who else we were with, but
okay. Yes, this was just last year.
Right? Yeah, it feels like longer to me, but
it might have been actually. Yeah, geez, Dan, this is season 2 for us, anyways. So I only did like one of just me. But yeah, no, yeah, it's funny because I was telling my aunt I was getting notifications through Kindle and stuff because I'm constantly reading stuff, and Dan said, "Oh yeah, Joanna White's going to be on," and I'm like, "Joanna White?" I'm like, "Why do I know that? I know that name. I know that name." And sure enough, there is it's Joanna White in my notifications because I follow you on Amazon. So,
yay.
Well, read, yeah. So I love reading Kindle. But anyways, yeah, it's too funny. I'm like, I know her. She's been on my show.
Yep.
So, yeah. Okay.
So as I like to do, Joanna, introduce yourself, I guess, again to everybody and let them know who you are and what you write.
Well, I'm obviously Joanna White, and I'm a Christian author mostly, but I do fantasy. I do, that's my main genre. I write a lot of contemporary romance, and I do biblical fiction and historical fiction. I'm kind of like trying to branch out into everything just because I write what I want to read. So I just kind of delve in whatever, but my main genre is primarily fantasy. I've been writing since I was 10 years old. I used to be published by a publisher company, but I'm on my own now. So I'm self-published mostly, and I'm a huge nerd. And yeah, Star Wars is my favorite movie series ever. So that's pretty much me.
So this book that you have, Assassin, now it is a prequel, right?
It was a prequel, and then I changed my mind and decided to make it book 4. But it was a prequel for the longest time until I decided to change things up and make it a book 4. So, but it can be read in any order, obviously, because it was originally written as a prequel. It's just the last few scenes will kind of tie in present day with the rest of the Valiant series. So.
Okay, my mother was wanting to pick it up, and she was like, "Now it's book 4," but and I was like, I remember her saying it's a prequel, so I couldn't. I wasn't totally correct, but she still can read this without having read the other ones yet. And I know she'll read the other ones too if she reads this one.
That sounds good. Yeah, I wrote the whole series randomly, and I didn't write them in the same order they're published in because I had to put them in the timeline order. And so they were specifically designed to be read like if whatever book you start with, you can kind of just start and just read whatever until the last few books of the series when all the heroes kind of come together. So it was kind of like the way the Marvel universe works before Marvel did it, because I wrote this back in when I was in high school back in 2012 and stuff. So that's kind of the way I designed it. So
okay, so for that matter, then why don't you introduce us to this universe and to this book?
Well, the Valiant series is my debut series. It's been my book baby for the longest time. And primarily the main premise of the whole series is that corruption is spreading through the galaxy, corrupting one world after another. And this man, Raiden, has been sent to find the Chosen to help him stop and fight against corruption. And so that's the main premise of the series. And so each book is a different world that's being corrupted a different way. And it's about that particular Chosen and their fight and struggle against the corruption, however that may manifest in that world. And Raiden's journey to try to recruit them, if you will. Whether he actually does or not, obviously you have to read the series to find out. But each book, like Hunter was book one, and in that one, the hunters were corrupted. They were genetically enhanced assassins who were killing prisoners in an outdoor arena. And an assassin in particular, there's a whole mystery surrounding who is corrupted and where this darkness, how it's seeping into the world, but like where it's seeping in at. But they each take their own individual plot lines, but that's kind of the overarching series plot line if you look at it deep enough. So
Okay. So you said these are, in a way they're independent stories tied in the same universe that you've created, right?
yes. Hmm.
Now, is this like is this hard fantasy, high fantasy, or is this science fiction?
It's more fantasy, and I would say high fantasy, epic fantasy due to the length. I definitely do delve into sci-fi in the sense that later on it's a war for the galaxy. But I don't write tech stuff very well. So I did fantasy style, like a fantasy way of getting around the universe, that sort of thing. Mostly because at the time I was way too new to even delve into sci-fi. I'm just now trying to kind of branch into sci-fi a little bit, but yeah, it's definitely epic fantasy. So
Okay, so are these stories all in the same world?
no. Each story is its own world within the universe, basically. And so you have like Hunter takes place on a world called Aberrel that's been taken over by a corrupt kind of dystopian government. Assassin in particular takes place on a world called Eos. Eos we actually visit in several other books later on in the series. So it's one of my precious worlds that I built. But yeah, each book early on is a different world altogether. So
Okay. Now I ask these questions. I talk to the audience here. I'm asking these questions, having a more intimate knowledge of her universe already, because at one point she is working on an anthology that brings other authors in to write within her canon, and so they create their own story within their universe. And when she mentioned this to me, my first reaction was yes, because that's what I've done for years as a fan fiction author on the side. Is I write stories in somebody else's canon, but I love writing a story, fan fiction story, from the perspective of its own story.
mhm,
I don't tell their character story. I don't my Star Trek fan fiction, if any, as you everybody should know by now, is
mhm,
based in my own characters, my own part of that universe, not my story of Picard and what the Enterprise is doing in this scene. No, I don't do
mhm.
that. I bring up, so that's what she was wanting, and so I did, but me went too far, and so I get a message back from Joanna going, it's too big. but you complimented with a great compliment, said that it was also good enough to be its own story. So
Mhm, yeah. Definitely. Yeah, that anthology takes place about 1,000 years after the Valiant series. And the galaxy, obviously is still the same, but we kind of in that series in particular, we branch out into how much bigger it is. In the Valiant series, when I wrote it, it's a little bit smaller in scale, but it's still a war for the galaxy as a whole. I just went a little bit bigger for the sake of my Republic Chronicles, which is again about 1,000 years after the Valiant series takes place. So I have to be careful talking about the history because that kind of spoils the Valiant series. So when I'm delving into the history for the Republic Chronicles, because it's ancient history by the time you get to the Republic Chronicles, so it's like, oops. So
mhm. Yeah, so I won't ask or spill too many things here that will that open the wrong, because I totally respect that in working myself in different books. But I will say, just last night working on my rewrite of that story, I just reached the 50,000 word mark. I had a goal set to bring it to build the story, so it's its own independent novel, and it's very different. I have not written much science fantasy, which is what
mhm,
this is. It's and that's a kind of a genre that not a lot of people know about. And then as soon as I explain it with one explanation, they go, "Oh!" I go, "Star Wars." Like, what do you
yeah.
mean? You have wizards and spaceships, science fantasy. Oh,
Hmm.
that makes sense. I'm like, yeah, science fantasy is a legitimate genre that's is underappreciated and frankly unknown in most sectors of the genre world, because it seems like it's a blending, but it really isn't. It really is not a blending. You do borrow elements from both sides of science fiction and fantasy, but at the same time, you have to make a story that makes both of those make sense together, which that means you are creating a whole different mindset than just, oh, I'm slapping two different things together. To me, it's like steampunk. Steampunk can definitely fit often in science fantasy because it's fictional science, but it's also got fantasy elements to it. So
Yeah. I know for the longest time I thought I was weird because it's like, okay, I can't write sci-fi, so I'm having to blend, make my own version of this stuff. And at the time I didn't know it was kind of a thing. So I was just doing my thing, writing my story. And it was kind of a relief to find out that this is a genre. There are people who write in it and there are people who read in it. And when you think about it, Star Wars kind of is that too. And so for me, it was like, maybe I'm not so weird. It's just that's where I feel most comfortable, honestly, because I love, like, the Star Wars universe. I love building. I not just world building, but galaxy building. I love coming up with different planets. I love coming up with a solar system idea, multiple solar systems. I even like the idea of coming up with spaceships and stuff, but I just don't understand the technology or the science. I'm not a science person. And so that's where I just include magic, and that's where I'm most comfortable, is like Lord of the Rings in space, honestly. you know
yeah, yeah, and that can be where a lot of struggle can be when you're working with this field, because it is, I think, harder than either of the other two, because you're trying to approach both subjects on equal ground, and in all reality they're not on equal ground. Science fiction wants to find, if it's real science or made up science, it has a scientific explanation for why something is happening. Fantasy doesn't need that.
Yeah. I get in that trouble all the time because I want to explain why the magic is working. And I often get caught up in trying to, like, apply the same logic with science fiction as I do with fantasy, in the sense that my magic system has to be built. It has to have rules. It has to make sense. And then I have to explain, okay, magically, is this realistic? Is this possible? It's like, well, no, it's magic. And
Yeah.
my husband constantly has to remind me about that. So it does get confusing at times.
And the thing is you actually have that in, like, Star Trek. Back when they were doing the original series, and in the original series, they were a lot more loose about what their technology could and couldn't do. By the time you got to the next generation, it began to stretch to the point that, okay, this only does this only does this can't do that. And Gene Roddenberry was once asked by somebody, what do you do if you don't have something to work in the scene? He said this: a tricorder can do anything I want it to do. And so in the original series, tricorders did everything you can imagine. Well, that's because it was like a magic wand. And the thing is it was still science fiction. So the science fiction fans were going, yeah, that's perfectly explained science. When he's literally going, this same tiny device can do a zillion things. In this episode, if I need to do that, it will now do this too. And he didn't sit there and give you some long technobabble explanation of why. He just said it did it. Oh, then it works. And as a fan, I now accept it.
Yeah.
That's more fantasy than science.
Mhm.
So in a way, science fiction has fantasy elements to it. They just fake it, and science and fantasy blends that together in different ways. Let's see. John Clark says there are ship designs that incorporate magic instead of technology, and that's actually what you're going to find in your books. Yep,
Yeah, that's kind of what
definitely.
I do. Yeah,
Yep.
in the earlier Valiant series, there's not a whole lot of ship traveling and stuff. It's mostly like it focuses on that particular world. Like Assassin focuses on Ao specifically. So it's only later on when you start to realize the corruption spreading through the galaxy and the war starts in, that it kind of starts to branch out, where you have all these different elements coming together. Like one of the elements in Assassin, Aiden, my assassin, he meets a pirate. He has to work with him for a mission. Well, the pirate, Captain Pierce, actually becomes later on important, and so his pirate ship gets to fly in space. And I have all this, there's technology from a vampire world that makes a shield over it, and so you have this pirate ship flying through space, and it's like just this, blend of different fantasy elements, just kind of put together for the sake of the story.
And in my version, the story that I eventually had to extract from her world, I write more science fiction. Now, I love
hmm
writing fantasy, but I've written science fiction actually longer than I've written fantasy, because I started my fan fiction writing for Star Trek years and years before I wrote my first fantasy book. So when I write science fiction, I write it from that mindset. So as I was writing this, I was actually struggling to get the fantasy in it without making it science. And eventually I decided to mine still has magic in it per se, because it was integral into the story regardless. But there's a lot more scientific explanation of why. Not there's more of that technobabble that pops up because I write Star Trek style. Star Wars actually is a lot more loose about that, and the fact that their technology doesn't have to have that Star Trek level explanation normally. I mean, the most famous weapon. I'll ask now, both of you, just if I said Star Wars, what's the first weapon you think of?
Lightsaber.
That's the first thing in your mind. Lightsaber. Lightsaber is powered by a magic crystal.
Well,
basically, yeah. Yeah.
So
And technically, I've seen videos where people try to explain if a lightsaber would work, and so far, realistically, scientifically speaking, it ain't gonna work. So it's like it actually seems science fictiony, but it's one of the fantasy elements to Star Wars. So
yeah, it's super. And when Lucas tried to science up the Force with midichlorians, the fans all universally went all across the board. And the thing is, it kind of got dropped until the Clone Wars tried to bring it back to the fantasy side. But it was first the Phantom Menace brought it in, and then it was kind of like rest of the series. No one talks about it anymore. It just we didn't mention that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, John Clark, he's lightsaber. So if you say Star Wars, you say lightsaber. In fact, most people go, right away. They know what you're talking about.
That is not what I was going to say.
Oh, what did you think of?
A Death Star. Right?
Yeah. I guess it's a giant weapon, so yeah. And however, they have explained in Rogue One, the Death Star's super laser is powered by kyber crystals.
Okay, well there you go.
So it still counts as a magic sword.
So once again, it's a weapon powered by magic crystals. So and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It absolutely works, and the fans love it. It blends a unique. It adds something that science fiction doesn't have in a lot of ways, and that's that magical side, that mystical side that makes it a little more fun, in my opinion. I think that's one of the selling points that's made Star Wars so popular for all these decades.
There's definitely an element of mystery to adding in fantasy that you don't get with stuff that's straight up explained. So
yeah, John Clark says he has a character, Cat, has a starship that works off of either magic or psionics. So yeah, I honestly think that science fantasy is growing in the world, and I think part of it is because Star Wars has made such a big comeback over the past decade. With Disney getting a hold of it and making a zillion shows and movies and toys and all these things. But also, I'm going to say it this way. For people who disagree with me, don't argue. Disney really dropped the ball on the movies, and they did not fulfill what the fans wanted, and how writers respond to that kind of deep void feeling is trying to fill it with story that feels like what you missed. And so what we do is it's like the vampire books skyrocketed after Twilight, but half of them were people wanting to write vampire books that weren't about sparkly vampires.
Yes, 100%.
And so that they literally the disappointment led to creation. And now I'm not saying if you like the Star Wars movies, you love them to death, good for you. I'm not going to say you're not going to watch them. Enjoy them, but I do think that as a whole, especially as writers, because I can't watch the Rise of Skywalker. I watched it once. It hurts to watch so badly because of the plot holes and writing that when I watch it, all I want to do is go to my computer and write a better story.
Exactly. That's what I do. And I feel like you nailed it when you say that it's like fuel for creativity, because I write what I want to read. And even though I don't read, that's why, is because nothing really satisfies that except what I can create, which is not an arrogance thing. It's just, I know myself best. And so I can write what I want to read. And so when you have that disappointment, like for instance, if you disagree, that's fine. And if you enjoy it, whatever. But if Game of Thrones, the final season, when you have that letdown, it's like you have to write something and actually do something with it. And you're right. Like I want to just go straight to my computer and just start writing stuff. And that's kind of how the Republic Chronicles came to be a thing, was because of Star Wars and wanting to do my own version of a similar thing. But I'm basing mine kind of on the Roman Empire with history, and a little bit of biblical history with Babylon and taking over Israel and stuff. So it's kind of a mix of elements, but it really fuels your creativity when you get disappointed. And so that's it, like you said, it feels like it's fantasy sci-fi is becoming bigger and bigger. It's not as nerdy or weird anymore, you know.
Yeah, and at the same time, I will say this: really good writing will also inspire more writing.
Yeah.
On the other end of that, because there are times I've read books, and I'm not going to name books because I don't want to offend anybody, who, especially writers. There's been some books I've read in the area I write in, which is young adult, that they're good, but they left me kind of like, when I'm done, it was fun, and I move on. It did not inspire me to write, nor did it insult. It didn't leave me wanting to do better than it. It did what it set out to do. I just wasn't inspired. But then I read some books that are so good that's like, oh, this makes me want to write because I love what this is and I want to do something like this. So
Yeah.
at the same time, really good writing and movies, really good movies can make you want to go home and write at the same time. But I honestly think that bad writing, bad movies are more of that because they make me want to go home and do something better than the crap I just saw that they spent $60 billion making.
Exactly. 100% agree with you there. Yeah. I remember, I think it was the Tarzan movie, the most recent Tarzan movie that came out. I was obsessed and like I couldn't watch it enough. And after it was done, I was like, okay, that's it. I'm doing a Tarzan retelling. That I have to. And so I went home and it was my first time trying something like that. And I had to, because like one book or whatever is not enough sometimes, and you want more, and the only way to get more is to, write it yourself, basically, in some cases. So yeah, I totally understand that.
A really weird example I'll give here, and people have always asked me, for my Earth's Last Starship, one of the main characters, and in the next book, his entire planet comes into play heavily, is he's a cat people, but they don't wear clothes. Where that actually, people ask all the time, why? I'm very curious about this, because they're not like Chewbacca, where it's like, oh, well, it really doesn't matter. It does matter. People are like, oh my God, you're showing. And they're like, so they don't know this. And I actually was inspired to write that kind of a race of people back when I wrote my first Star Trek fan fictions, because I read John Carter of Mars.
Oh yeah.
And in the original, I at the time I was on a kick of reading the original texts of books like L. Frank Baum, or any of these books that were like the pinnacles of fantasy sci-fi back in the early age of it. I was reading them all, and I read that one, and Tarzan was interesting. The actual original book, I read the original telling, not one of the rewrites they did over the years.
Oh yeah.
And it was interesting, but it's a little hard to get through because when you read the original, it's super racist. Oh my God, is it racist? Now the retellings they did in the 70s when they re-released it, they actually rewrote a lot of the book to clean it up because it was super racist. But when when the book John Carter of Mars, I'm reading the original one, they can't ever do that as a movie, because the entire book, everything on Mars, including John Carter, is naked. And like showing naked, not just like, oh, like again, like Chewbacca, it's like big, but he makes them primitive, stupid. I mean, the reason they're this way is because, and the thing is, he said he wrote these characters based on his love of Native Americans, but he had a racist view of them because a lot of Native Americans didn't wear much clothing. A, they're in a really hot climate, and B, it just wasn't part of their culture. But he presumed that was because they were primitive and thus ignorant, which is wrong. Is absolutely wrong, and that's how I wrote that. And so when I wrote my first Star Trek fan fiction, I created a race of people that didn't have an understanding of clothing, but would offend people who do because of how they look. But I wanted to write them to where they were advanced, civilized, understandable, likable, not sexual. I wanted it to be a part of their culture and not make them stupid. I was actually upset reading John Carter of Mars because every race on the Mars was all just ignorant. And I was like, that's so degrading. I didn't like it. And I wanted to do something better. So
Yeah, I mean, that's really good race building, and that's what I love is creating different worlds and races and things that maybe don't make sense to us, but if you think about it, like, if hypothetically, if other worlds existed, whether in space or just fantasy, they wouldn't all have a culture that we know and understand. It would have to be different. And, you know, like a lot of people bash like Jar Jar in the prequels of Star Wars because of the way that he sounded and oh, he was stupid and stuff like that. But even as an adult looking back on it, I loved him as a kid, but looking back on it, like the Gungans were well written race because they talked different. And yeah, they sounded ignorant, but that's how he made them to be. So that's actually a showing of how good he is at race building and culture building in the Star Wars galaxy. And so I would never back that, even if yes, they sound stupid, but that's part of the you know the culture. And it's really exciting race building that yeah, some cultures may not know clothes, some cultures may not know this or that. And I really try to be realistic in the sense that not every culture is going to be cut and dry copied from something that we know and understand here on earth or even in earth's history. So that's one thing I strive when I create different worlds and races and stuff. So
yeah, cultural anthropology is actually a really good tool for an author to apply, read about, because one of my pet peeves in Star Trek is the fact they meet a new world. Everybody on the planet seems to be from the same culture.
yeah.
You come here to Earth today and just go 30 miles north where I am now. You're in Canada. Oh, it seems like America, but culturally, it is going to be different, noticeably different. Go 500 miles, go 1,000 miles from point A where you are, and you're going to be encountering here in the United States cultural differences that are shocking. Go over
Yeah.
to Asia, go to Africa, go to Europe, all these places. So that's beautiful world building, culture building, is to study human cultures and the differences between us, and then use that leverage of difference to build your race and your culture better. Because then you can go, and I said Lucas never presented the Gungans as stupid. He represented the perception of them by outsiders as
Right.
such.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because unfortunately we do the same thing. When you hear a person from Asia, particularly who talks very broken English, we treat them as children because the way they're talking sounds like a 2-year-old trying to put sentences together. No, they're not. My God, they're way smarter than me. Japan
Yeah.
scares me how smart they are. So it's great, but we have a bad perception because of that cultural divide. But when you're reading, I said John Carter Mars, you read that one. No, he makes it clear how stupid they are, and that's not perception. It's just because of what they are. And
Yeah.
I wanted to move away from that. Now, going on to your stuff, bringing it back to your stuff. I was listening to your show, your live broadcast the other night, and you talked about your building, your world building, and you said that you built planet, solar system stuff, a whole bunch of them, before you started writing the books, was it?
Yeah, so what happened was I was writing the Valiant series, and as we talked about, each book focused on a particular world, a particular character, and a particular plot. I didn't even have the whole Valiant series connected as a plot line, like the series plot line connected, because when I wrote it, I was just writing for fun in high school, and okay, I want to write a shifter book, fine, we're gonna write shifters. And that's, shifter. I want to write an assassin, boom, there's assassin. I want to write samurai, boom, there's samurai. And that's literally how I did it up to the last 3 books. Now, when all the heroes come together and they're getting ready to fight for the galaxy, I'm like, okay, I need to figure out the series plot line now. It has to all come together. And it's a war for a galaxy. So I was like, how am I going to know where they are and what they're fighting for? I'm going to need settings for each one of these. And if I write it as like, when I'm actually writing it, if I have to come up with the world or whatever, it's going to slow me down and it's going to slow down my creativity. And I never built planets before to this extent. I did it a little bit focused on the book I was writing, which would take me like a year or sometimes longer. So my husband's like, before you even write the last 2 books with the war, I want you to sit down and you're going to build 40 worlds. And he said, here's 5. You're going to create 5 worlds that are wild worlds. You're going to create 5 worlds that are more village based. You're going to create 5 mega city worlds. And he gave me, I don't remember the other ones, but those were like 5 of this, 5 of this, 5 of this, all the way up to 40. And I sat down for maybe like a week or something like that. And I just started building, coming up with world ideas and coming up with different things. And then when I got to 40, I was like, why don't we make it even 50? So I came up with 10 extras and there, boom, my galaxy. So all I had to do was kind of figure out where I wanted them to be. And that gave me a overall huge like galaxy setting so that I could just move my characters where I needed and move the war along wherever I needed to. So that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah, and going back to, I was talking about before I had you on here, my little soapbox I stood on is that I've heard a lot of people who will tell new authors, especially fantasy and sci-fi authors, to not world build before you start writing. Not get lost in world building.
Yeah.
To do a little, but build as you write. And I actually took that to heart. And my Dragonborn series, I let the world grow on its own organically as I wrote the story. It worked.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it can work otherwise. And having someone look at you and go, no, that's not how you do it. Again, there is no solid no and no solid yes, because I always point out Tolkien. He created an entire fantasy race and language before he even started writing The Hobbit.
Yeah.
He could fluently speak Elvish before he wrote the first elf in his books. And so when these people look at me and go, you can't write a good book if you spend all your time world building, I'm like, well, I think Tolkien proved you wrong, and he's a little bigger than you, me, and anybody else I know. So don't tell me what I can't do. But I'll give you this: you built and then you stopped and wrote. I've met a lot of people who are like, oh, I've been working on my world for like 20 years, and I like, you have a story yet? I think I have a plot story. I'm like, no. You're lost in world building, and you can do that.
You actually can get lost in world building, but it's not so simple because I've actually used both techniques and they have both worked. So it actually doesn't even depend on the type of writer. It honestly depends on the story. I've written one, I think it's called The Eighth Curse. I wrote one book and I literally didn't have the world, and I just like my characters went on a journey and I came up with little bits and pieces as I went along. And then like we already talked about, I have others where I built the whole world. I know the languages, I know the characters, I know the people, the culture, before I ever start writing. But at some point you do have to stop and say, okay, my world's built, that's all I know, let's start writing. And so it's a balance, but both techniques work equally well. And it's not one wrong, one right, and it's not one that's more efficient than the other. It honestly depends on your story and what's right for you and your particular book, because I've used both. And I don't really prefer one way over the other, because doing it beforehand's a lot of work. But when you're writing, if you're doing it while you're writing, it slows you down. So there's pros and cons to both techniques, and it just depends on your story.
I think the one world building advice I do always give newer authors is that there is some room to start with a little world building, in this sense that you must know enough that you don't contradict yourself. If you don't want to world build, or if you feel you want to do it organically, go ahead, try. But be very leery of the problem of contradicting yourself. If you start your story in the rain and your characters are now traveling out of it and talking about that, and then 3 chapters later you talk about how this world hasn't seen rain in 40 years.
Yeah, I've done that before. You have to keep notes. That's why I always keep notes, is because you can contradict yourself. One time in one book, it was a contemporary romance kind of book. I actually wrote the one character, she's a teacher, and her nephew came over to stay the night. And the idea was that her nephew runs away to a concert and she has to go get him. And she ends up meeting her main guy, and that's how they interact with each other. I wrote that chapter twice because I wrote this book over the span of I wasn't writing in it consistently. So I'd write a book, come back to it, delve a little, go away. And I actually wrote that scene where he ran away and she went to the concert twice in 2 different chapters of the book. And so when I'm reading it later, I'm like, hold on a minute, I already wrote this, so
yeah,
it happens. You have to keep notes and keep track of everything.
Well, it's also, when it comes to world building, it's also just the small details, because you'll totally miss something that you've put in there about your world that you've said, and then later on your readers are going to go, oh no, you said all the trees that he ever saw were purple, and he's why is he not talking about that, or why did he say I grew up around all these brown trees? That doesn't make sense. That's world building, where it's literally your setting. And plot holes are one thing, or doubling up. I've done the exact same thing where I've written the same scene more than once and went, oops, I did this twice. But it's also just the little things, and not even little, sometimes big things, but small things that you say that are your world. and then you totally throw that out the window.
I
And
know I've done that. I've done that in the Republic Chronicles. I was just reading Light Magi in paperback for the first time, and as I'm reading it, in one chapter, one character, she's talking about her height and comparing it to all these people, and she's 5'8", which is, pretty tall for a human woman. And I'm reading later on in the book, her and her boyfriend are on a date, and she's like, joking about short women problems and how she can't hardly reach him when they're kissing. And I'm going, you're 5'8". I mean, how tall is he? You're not a short woman. And I'm like, this is already in paperback. And so I'm like, I have to keep character notes too, because you can get really tiny details like that, mixed up really quickly. So
Yeah, and that's again, it's very good to have notebooks with you. I honestly feel writing it down physically is better than typing it out because it's easier for me to grab and flip it over. Oh, that's right, that's his name. My problem is actually names more than anything else. I will name a random person, and then 14 chapters later they show up again, and I'm like, they were what was his last name? And so if I haven't written it down, I'm scrolling through my book going, where was he? Where was he? Where was he? And 2 hours later I find him.
Yeah, I've had to do that so many times. The find button on Word is like the godsend, because it's like I was doing that the other day where I was editing Light Magi, and I knew that I had included this one character, but I wanted to change his story and put it in the next book. But I'm like, I already wrote his story down and changed the details. And I'm searching for his name. It turns out I mentioned his race, but not his name in the scene. So I stumbled on it later on. I'm like, I gotta change this because I can't have it be canon anymore. And it's like, I use PowerPoint slides actually is what I use now for note keeping, because it's like I can just scroll through the big slides and keep track of, okay, this character, all of his information's on this slide, and I don't get lost in a sleuth of information. So
yeah, John Clark says he tries to start small in world building and build on it. Futurina, that's his story home. His home world has a rich history because my friends and I fleshed it out over years. Yeah, and that can be very helpful. It can be very helpful to talk to people about your world building too, because it may sound so cool to you, and your friends are going, "That's stupid. Don't do that." Or
yeah.
they will pull out the flaw. In my world, all the water has been poisoned by this, and he has to solve the problem. They're going to go, "So, what do people drink?" They would all be dead. Okay, I have to go somewhere else. At first you're just like, this is so cool, until your friends go, no, it's not.
Yeah, my husband and my sister like poking plot holes in any of my ideas before I make them, and I'm like, stop poking holes. But it actually helps, flesh the ideas out and make them make sense. So
Yep. So
yeah.
So and Brian is working on writing. Are you taking any notes here, Brian?
I have to. I'm experiencing everything that you're talking about, because what I do is serialized. So I release my book in chapters every week,
right.
and I narrate it myself. But I have a pen name, so it's under Ryland Mason. So I do have people who pay attention and listen. They're relatives, but I consider them fans already. But like you said, they poke, and they're like, "Wait a minute, you said in chapter 4 blah 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 blah, but yet in chapter 5 it's the opposite now. How is that even possible?" And then they try to they get confused because they think that maybe I've made a mistake. Like I'm trying to use an example here. My aunt was just telling me, I'm writing on a cruise ship, so I have to learn about the cruise ship. Good thing I know a lot about cruise ships. But anyways, so if there's a fire, the fire doors are going to close. Only if the system detects that there actually is a fire there, and once they close, you can't open them back up. Blah 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 blah. Well, the doors were closing. They were closed, and there was no fire there. So it kind of confused people as to why the doors were closing. And I didn't think it was a big deal. No one's gonna, whatever. So, but later on, you find out the bad guy has control of the ship. He can do whatever he wants. So, and then I think the other thing is that, the captain picks up the phone. It's dead. Well, then all of a sudden the phone starts ringing. Well, wait a minute. The phone was just dead. How is it, So it's like, I get what you're saying. So it's like, oh yeah, stop. Just read. Just read it. Read it. Or listen to it, I should say. Just listen to it. But
I'll tell you right
I
now.
enjoy it, though. I enjoy having the conversation
Mhm.
and explaining. So I don't mind it, but it's like, yeah, stop poking.
I will tell you right now, every plot hole that comes up, you will never forget. You will always remember I made that mistake. Every time you read through the story or hear about it, you're gonna think, yeah, and that scene, I actually accidentally did this first. It will always stick with you.
Yeah.
But use that, remember it, so you don't
Mhm.
do it again. That's you use that little bit of memory. I can list probably 5 instances just in the first Dragon One book where I when it was being read initially by mom, who was my first reader, she was like, okay, this scene you have this, but he did that. And I'm like, oh crap. And then I'm writing on notes and fixing it. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so, and to this day, I can name them all. You will always remember that. But
I
Yeah.
know in Hunter, I had where my husband was my first reader for Hunter, and he's supposed to be a genetically enhanced assassin who only knows killing. He has no memory of anything else other than killing. And I didn't know fight scenes very well. So in all the fight scenes, he was like getting beat left and right, and he was like hurt and struggling. And it's like they're supposed to be superhuman. And my husband goes, yeah, he's a little wimp. And I'm like, I don't want Jared to be wimpy. And so we had to go through each of the fight scenes and like fix him so that he seems more like the assassin and the genetically enhanced kind of super soldier that he's supposed to be. Because I didn't know I was writing him in a kind of a wimpy way. So that's something I'll never forget.
yeah, I had that problem in the book I'm reading, the Joshua of Egypt story. The main character, Joshua, it gets blessed slash cursed with a perfect, not to say perfect body, but he can't be hurt. But it doesn't mean he doesn't feel pain.
Hmm.
And so it was a challenge at first writing fight scenes because he literally spears can't penetrate his body. He can't be hurt by like that. And so I was like, how do I express this fight scene where it doesn't seem like people are fighting a rock? And I'm like, well, okay. I went back and wrote, he may not be able to get hurt, but he can still feel pain, as in he doesn't feel like being stabbed, even though he's not. No, but he can. If something hits him in the head, it's going to make him feel it in his head. He's going to get a headache. So that helped me. But when I first wrote the first part of the book, I was like reading it through myself, going, my guy, he's the other end of the spectrum. He's too strong. I can't
Hmm.
write fight scenes because he can't lose. So I had to flip it around to give him some drawback. And it worked. It actually worked out really well because I made some kind of comedy in there, in fact, because he gets the crap beaten out of him because he will throw himself in front of other people to defend. But then the next day, he feels it. He feels it very strongly. So it
Hmm.
made it fun. But yeah, I understand that particular issue. Brian's
Yeah.
lost power.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you just went really dark there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm posting her Amazon like links and stuff to all her books. I'm sorry.
So,
I'm
anyways,
I'm listening. I'm just
oh, there you
posting
are.
her links because I know that eventually we're going to ask, well, where can you find these books, and especially Assassin? So
Hmm.
Yes, we are getting close to the end of the show, so that is a good question to go on to. Good segue there. So all your books are available on Amazon, correct?
Yes, Amazon and Assassin in particular in the Valiant series is everywhere. It's wide, so you can find it on Kobo, Apple, what's the other one? Barnes and Noble, and my website. I do sell them myself sometimes too. So you can find it everywhere pretty much.
So they are all available, and as I said, as you know, it came out Assassin. Is it came out this
it's
week?
99 cents
Yeah,
too.
it came out May 3rd.
So
I
it
just
is
noticed.
it is currently available. And as she said before, you can read these in the order by which you want to read them. And that's really awesome because then you can pick them up on as you want. And but do so, and don't forget to leave reviews. I always say that for mine, for everybody's. Make sure you leave reviews. They're vital to our survival as authors,
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely.
in weird ways, but they are. I'm not happy with this. The fact that Amazon's gone to ratings and reviews, where people can just leave a rating.
That irritates me because I had like a 2-star rating on my Mystic series that my publishers who had released it actually dropped it because they basically flopped. And I got the rights back to them. And I had like 2-star or 3-star reviews on it, but like there was no feedback. And like I value, like if you want to give me a 1-star, that's fine, but tell me why so I can fix it and make it better. But there wasn't, and I was like, what's wrong? Why are you giving it a 2-star? What do you hate about it? How can I fix it? So it's always leave at least a little bit of feedback. Like it sucks because of this, so I can fix that and make it better.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My opinion is if you want to not write a review because you just don't want to. I know people who just are scared to write reviews because I don't know how to. And you really like the book, all right, a 4 or 5-star, no word review. Okay. And honestly, it helps for my rankings and all, or book rankings, but ultimately, it doesn't. I don't think it's going to help the book sell much when reviews actually something said is good. However, those I appreciate even if they're just ratings. But if you're going to leave a 3-star or less, tell me why.
yeah, pretty much. That's
Tell me
how I
why.
feel. I can take it. Just please tell me why. I just want to know.
There's nothing that can be said about my books that negatively that anybody, no one can hurt my feelings that bad. I have been through the ringer of the worst possible reviews. I do not have time to go into the crap I've been through on reviews. So let's just say if you're being honest about your review and you're worried about hurting my feelings, you're not. You're not going to. I've been there, been done, been beat up. I've survived, and I will move on.
I know as a writer, I'm very insecure, so you can't be meaner to me than I am to myself. So go ahead, lay it on me. I'm fine.
Yeah.
We'll survive.
Yeah.
So, anyways, all the books from Joanna White are available on Amazon, and of course, there are more coming out. She has other books outside of this series as well. So go check that out. We have, as Brian just posted, the links to that, so you can go onto our page, find those.
That I did.
Check out her website and check out the books and pick them up. They are an inexpensive entertainment right now. Go grab them. Right now, with the prices of everything going up, it's nice to go for 99-cent things.
Yeah, it's 99 cents right now on Amazon, I believe, for Kindle.
That's like a third of a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So you're good, So
grab it now. I mean, because sometimes those things can go for $6.99 or something like that. So 99 cents. Grab it, folks.
Yep,
I did.
So, as I said, the show is we're now on the close. So thank you for being here, Joanna. Good luck with this.
Again.
Glad to have you on again.
Yes.
Me for the first time, but for Brian, you're the second time around.
Right.
Which is awesome. We're glad to have you again in the future when you have more stuff coming out and want to talk about your writing. So
thank you guys for having me. It's been a lot of fun. So
yeah.
I got a little tangenty there at times, but it happens. So
all right.
So good night, everybody. And Brian, anything else you want to say?
Not really.
It's a great show, and we will see you all next week. Don't forget, next week, 13th, 14th, and 15th of May, I'm going to be at the Suburban Showplace in Novi, Michigan for the Motor City Comic Con. I have all my books and comic books available. I'll be there signing and having all the fun there. And then in the last weekend in May, I'm going to be in Knoxville for the GameCon and Rocky Top Games and doing book signings there. So for the next month, I'm available for book signings. Come out, see me, and let's have some fun. So other than that, good night, everybody. And thank you for being here.
Bye.